days a week as it relates to COVID. And so what I think happens is it's a progression. And so just like anybody, a month ago, I felt much better than I did, a week ago. And so I think what happens with the kick in the back, the fall competitions just made sense because just like there's a lot of innuendo about teams, or I should say conferences this week, declaring what their fall is going to look like, well, it changes. And so what happens is there might be some conferences that say, we need another week. And so I was okay because at the end of the day, Josh, we're always going to do what's in the best interest of our student athletes and our fans and patrons and supporters. So we're not gonna rush something through. And so I think part of that's not being tethered to a certain date. And so when it came and we looked at all the evaluations as a conference of the fall kickback or postponement, it made sense. And so I think for us, that's just how we're gonna have to evaluate. It's a fluid deal. You're not making decisions in a vacuum.
Are you trying to hold off on making the decisions as long as possible? I say that first off, the Boise State game seems to be something that might be difficult to do considering travel and all that.
Well, that's one of the things. There's so many variables involved, right? Because obviously you look at Boise and their conference affiliation and what they're going to do, our conference affiliation, and the reality is too the Power Five. And a lot of people may not think about it, but the Power Five, or some people say the A5 in particular, what the SEC does is going to have a bearing on us. Because if you think about it, a lot of our guarantee games as a conference, and in particular, like on November 21st, there's 4 teams, including us, that have a guarantee game with SEC schools. And so what the SEC does is going to have a large bearing on what we do. And people may say, well, why is that beyond the geographic footprint? Well, also because we're tied into them. A lot of our schools run their schedule. And so what the SEC does, whether they go to an all-conference schedule or whatnot, I'm not really sure. There's a bunch of different models out there. That leaves a hole in our schedule, hypothetically, if they decide to go that route. And so it's a domino effect. And that's the piece, too, is that, again, that's what makes it so complex. We can talk about starting points or start dates or kickoff times, or excuse me, kickoff dates, but the reality is it also looks at the sheer number of games and who those games are against. And if some of your opponents are going a different direction, well, all of a sudden that opens up a hole. And so then the question becomes, well, how many games do you have to fill, if any at all? And so it's just a complex, and it's just a complex solution. That's one of the things that I was thinking about the other day when I was thinking about football scheduling. A lot of times people will say, well, hey, can you go get this team and this team? And really, football scheduling is really complex. And on top of that, when you're trying to look at football scheduling a couple weeks out or a couple months out, it's really Pandora's box. And so it's not as simple of lining teams A and B up. There's a lot of variables involved.
How hard would you guys be hit if you lost a Boise or a Ole Miss or both?
Ideally, if some having the Boise game, we just move that, trip out to Boise and keep that series would be the goal. But the Ole Miss game, there's a guarantee associated with that. So that's something for us. We're still working through the process and nothing's determined yet of force majeure. There's some contractual stuff that us and all the schools are going to have to work through. The good thing for us as it relates to that game is this is in November. And so to me, as you look at some of the models out there, some of the start dates could potentially be pushed back. And so some schools, had those bye games on the front end. I think for us on the back end, I think that better positions us as a school to work through some of those issues. I'd say the next 5 to 10 days, there's going to be a lot of anticipated activity. And here's the way I think Josh is going to work. It's not going to be stretched out over a week. I think you're going to see a couple of announcements, and then it's going to run pretty quick. Because what ends up happening is once that first domino falls, then there becomes a bunch of residual effects. And so I would expect it's not going to be like 2 weeks before, a week before. But in relates to the Boise game in particular, we're not going to wait to the week above. The week before, I should say. It's going to be here the next 5 to 10 days. Is my best guess on making some decisions and kind of going from there. Right now, we're in a good spot relative to our peers, but that all could change in a week or two. So I think the biggest thing is trying to look at when the dust settles, who has open slots in the conference. And then listen, there's a reason why a lot of conferences are talking about conference only or +1 conference only, because I think there's more controllables there. And I think that's the piece that no one can sit there and tell you is you're trying to project out in the next week or two who's going to have open dates. And none of us know. And not only open dates, but it has to align with the open date that you have. And so it's really a matrix of stuff.
As far as the attendance, as far as the crowd at the games, has there been talk of limiting? How limited will there be? Social distancing?
Yeah.
What have you guys talked about?
Yeah, so I think without any finality in that, you have to plan for all scenarios. So I look at kind of things in two buckets as far as in the inner bowl. You're going to have a seating capacity piece, which, I'm assuming just like most states it would come from the state, right? And so they're going to say, well, you're allowed this many, this percentage of people in venues, right? But here's a piece, and I think is more prevalent or more pertinent, I should say, is the social distancing component. Because if you have social distancing component and you have 6 feet, and you're going to have close contacts, and then you're going to have non-close contacts, that's really going to drive the capacity number. Because at the end of the day, you could say, I think Texas had 50% capacity. Well, I'll just share you just working through. It's really a mathematical exercise. If social distancing is in play, that's going to be a hard number to get to. It just doesn't work out. I don't care if you have a venue of 20,000 people or 100,000. When you start looking at what social distancing requirements are, it knocks out seats, it knocks out rows and other stuff. So yeah, we're working through every scenario. So to me, the number we really have tried to hone in on, seating capacity is important. It's the social distancing piece. That's where the devil's in the details, quite honestly, of basically using that interpretation or guidance, and then really expand it all across Paulson. And so we're gonna do things this year. They're gonna try to create additional capacity. We're gonna open up the hills this year. We're going to try to find ways to repurpose some spaces and try to make it as interactive and tied to our history as possible. But we also have to open up other areas just to get more people in the venue because of social distancing expectations.
How would you determine who could come?
Yeah.
Would that be based on season tickets?
Yeah. So what we're working through that, it's going to be through a combination of lifetime giving, season ticket holders. It's going to be, there's going to, we don't have all the answers right now because part of it is we got to see what our capacity levels are going to be and work through that. Our whole goal is to listen, I've said it before and I'll say it again, the best thing about Eagle Nations are its members, and we're going to do our best to get as many members of Eagle Nation in there as possible. But without knowing what capacity you have, it's kind of hard to know what the cutoff point is, how many people we get in the game. And I'll tell you something I think is really important too is our student body is a huge home field advantage. And so we got to make sure our students, we're making sure we have their best interests in mind as well in terms of getting as many students in as possible. So to me, there's a bunch of data we got to work through. But before we get there, we have to know what we can get in, and then kind of basically, and again, I'd say mathematical exercise. In a lot of ways, Josh, it is, because you start taking section over section over section, they're symmetrical, right? And so you're kind of looking, all right, well, I'm knocking out, for every row, we're knocking out this many rows, and you're looking at close contacts and couplings of 4 or 6 people. And so it kind of does become a mathematical exercise. But I promise you, we'll do our best to responsibly and safely get as many people as we can into Paulson under the correct state and university guidance. We're going to have to pay more attention to some things probably in the past that haven't been maybe looked at as closely. So for example, a lot of times you might not have a security personnel as an usher where they're making sure that your ticket aligns with the section. Well, now that usher might be tasked with, all right, let's make sure social distancing measures are kept in place. So I think it's more of a refocusing of efforts for some of the security personnel in venue. But yeah, I mean, there's going to be a lot of changes this year. That has to be. And so for us, we're going to do the best we can to make sure that we educate. Because that's the other thing too, Josh, I'll tell you. If you wait till people get in venue and then try to bring a bunch of changes, it's on us to make sure we're educating. And I don't know if education is the right word. I'd say more informing our fans and patrons on what they can expect on game day this year. And so it's no different in the past. My last institution, we had to implement metal detectors. That was a big undertaking. And so we had to make sure that people understood what they could take through the metal detector, what they couldn't, when they could expect the concentration of lines. And so really for us, we're going to do the best we can to inform people as soon as we can right out of the gate. And so what you'll see for us is we're transparent in everything we do. And so we'll try right out of the gate to answer as many questions as we can. And ultimately questions are going to come up along the way of, well, hey, how does this play? And then how does this play? And for some things, we're not going to have an answer out of the top of our head, but we're going to make sure that we get back to people and we'll work through the process. Because at the end of the day, we're all on the same side, as far as on the same team, on the same side of the equation. We all want to have a fun, enjoyable game day. We're all proud of being part of Eagle Nation. But we also have some obligations to make sure we get safely, have safe entryways and ultimately have people that come in the venue and can feel they're in a safe environment and that we're trying to uphold the requirements we have from the state and local municipalities. We need Eagle Nation's help, like we talked about, wearing a mask and do right, as Coach Russell said. So wearing a mask right now is really important. I don't have one on now because we have 6 feet, but I do wear one when I'm outside of my office. And so that's right now what Eagle Nation can do. And then in venue and outside the venue is continue to help us with social distancing as much as possible. It's really an impossible task to regulate everything, and I'm not going to be in that position anyway to do that, and I don't want to do that. But I will share you is we're going to make sure that we do everything we can to safely accommodate as many people as we can, and also educate and inform people to help us out as well, because it's really a two-part equation. We can have all the policies and all the advisements in the world, but also too our Eagle Nation, our fans and patrons and even visitors from other schools have to make sure they do their part as well.
What positives do you see on campus here, as far as if there was anything?
Well, I'll just speak for myself. I think being a new employee, but even if I'd been here 5 years, I think there's a cross pollination. There's a locking of arms across campus. In times of heightened alertness or things we're working through, I should say. And so really the thing that's really impressed me is under Dr. Marrero's leadership, we're all working together. And so whether it's a Zoom call, whether it's check-ins, that's one of the things I think is one of the strengths of Georgia Southern is an alignment from the top on down. I mentioned last time we talked, that was a big reason why I'm here. And I think that's one of the things I think is a positive is a lot of times in our normal day-to-day operations, and we're no different than any other company, you kind of get in the routine of doing stuff, and you're not always reaching out to different people across the aisle. And then one of the things I think one of the advantages of going through this process right now, or working through a pandemic, is that we're talking to people across campus every day of the week, and sometimes every day. And I think at the end of the day, that's the type of synergies that you need to ultimately put your best foot forward as a university.